A message landed in my inbox this week that genuinely stayed with me for days. The person who sent it had done their own arithmetic and arrived at a conclusion that frightened them. Out of 8 billion human beings on this planet, they had convinced themselves that virtually none of us would ever be permitted to build real wealth through XRP. Here is what surprised me most. When I actually sat down and examined the logic driving that fear, it unraveled far more quickly than I anticipated. But that particular belief was not the only one that collapsed under scrutiny, because approximately 3 years ago, a single post on social media handed an entire generation of cryptocurrency holders what amounted to an instruction. Walk away from crypto. Redirect your attention toward AI instead. And a remarkable number of people followed that direction without much resistance. What I want to do today is make a composed, somewhat uncomfortable argument. The very people who abandoned XRP in favor of artificial intelligence may have walked away from the one digital asset that was already functioning as an AI investment the entire time, whether they recognized it or not. I am not asking you to accept any of this on my authority alone. We are going to move through it together, methodically, one layer at a time. By the time we reach the final point, I believe the logic will feel considerably more grounded than it might appear right now. So, settle in, and let us begin. Start with the thing that virtually no one wants to say directly. In this current moment, holding XRP carries a particular emotional weight. You look at the price chart. The number sits almost motionless, and a familiar voice somewhere in the back of your mind repeats the same question it has been asking for months. Why is it not higher? I want to treat that question with genuine respect because most of the answers circulating in this space arrive too quickly and without enough examination. The fashionable explanation is deliberate suppression, that some coordinated force is holding the price in place until large institutional players are positioned and ready to move. Possibly. I'm not in a position to confirm or refute that claim definitively. But I would gently observe that a stagnant, frustrating price chart is not actually evidence of organized manipulation. Sometimes it is simply what an asset looks like during the period when the regulatory framework surrounding it is still being constructed. And that observation is the one I keep returning to most consistently. The most significant barrier between XRP and a genuine upward revaluation is not market sentiment. It is not retail enthusiasm or the absence of it. It is clarity. It is the unglamorous legal scaffolding that determines whether a serious financial institution is comfortable, from a compliance standpoint, with touching this asset at all. The resolution of the Ripple and SEC dispute was supposed to function as the green light. In the mental models many holders had constructed, the price should already be trading somewhere in the range of $8 to $13, representing the full recovery from those years of legal uncertainty. It has not arrived there yet. My interpretation is not that the underlying story failed. My interpretation is that the final document has not yet been signed. Now, I want to be direct with you here, because this channel is not built on optimism as a substitute for honesty. If your portfolio is carrying losses as you watch this, that is a real experience, and I have no interest in dismissing it with an encouraging phrase. But there is a distinction that deserves some quiet thought. A price that has declined on a screen represents a paper loss. It only crystallizes into something permanent the moment a decision is made to sell under pressure. Patience is not a guaranteed strategy. It does not promise any particular outcome. What it does accomplish is preserving your optionality long enough for the actual narrative to develop. The holders who exit during the silent, sideways stretches are typically the ones who never experience what the eventual breakout actually felt like from the inside. So, if regulatory clarity is the real catalyst, the natural next question follows immediately. When that clarity finally materializes, how significant could the resulting move actually be? And is there a specific quantity of XRP that might quietly position an ordinary holder for a life-changing outcome? Let us examine the arithmetic that circulates constantly in these conversations. First, a word on volatility, because people invoke the term as though it were inherently negative. Volatility is simultaneously the thing people claim to despise and the thing they quietly require. It is the mechanism. It is the engine that can move an account from a modest starting point to a number with real transformative weight. It also operates in the opposite direction, and that reversibility is precisely what generates fear. But here is the thing worth understanding. The same force that drove XRP lower is the identical force capable of launching it significantly higher. When I observe a chart that has moved sideways for an extended period, what I am genuinely watching for is the moment that compressed energy re-enters the equation. First come the modest movements, 5 cents, 10 cents, 25 cents within a single session. Then, when the conditions align properly, movements measured in full dollars. Now, to the numbers themselves, because this is where the compelling scenarios live. The mathematics is not complicated at its surface. 1,000 XRP priced at $1,000 per unit equals $1 million. 10,000 XRP at $100 per unit equals the same figure. The multiplication is straightforward enough to do in your head. The genuinely difficult element was never the arithmetic. It was always the assumptions embedded beneath it. One of those assumptions entered the conversation recently through an analyst discussing SWIFT, the messaging infrastructure that facilitates money movement between financial institutions worldwide. The argument was constructed as follows. If XRP ultimately processes even a meaningful portion of SWIFT's transactional volume, with 14% cited as the specific figure, then a 20 times appreciation from the current price is not difficult to construct a case for. From that premise, the millionaire calculation becomes a short logical step. Hold 10,000 units of the appropriate asset. The reasoning continues, and within a window of 1 to 5 years, a 7-figure outcome enters the realm of possibility. I want to hold this carefully, because this is precisely the category of claim that requires clear thinking rather than enthusiasm. The word, if sitting at the front of that sentence, is doing an enormous amount of work. That is a substantial conditional attached to a very large number. But it is not an irrational premise on its face, and that is what makes it worth engaging with seriously rather than dismissing or celebrating reflexively. Plenty of serious, credentialed people in this space share a directionally similar long-range view, one that places XRP at approximately $1,000 somewhere in the vicinity of 2028. My honest assessment is this. If the catalysts materialize this year, if genuine regulatory clarity arrives in 2026, then that kind of timeline remains plausible. If clarity is delayed, the timeline adjusts accordingly and extends with it. Beneath all of these projections sits the only factor that ultimately matters in any market: supply and demand. Set aside market capitalization comparisons for a moment. Consider what happens if institutions begin systematically withdrawing XRP from circulation and securing it within liquidity pools for actual operational use, the kind of use described in the BIS white paper. Available supply contracts while demand expands. That is the quiet mechanical process by which a $2 asset becomes something considerably larger. There is nothing magical about it. It is simply less of the available thing competing for more of the incoming demand. But here is the component that never appears in anyone's financial model. Demand does not materialize from nothing. Something must function as the force that pulls that volume of capital into the ecosystem. And the something I believe is being consistently and significantly underestimated is the precise thing people were instructed to redirect their attention toward instead: artificial intelligence. Which returns us directly to that social media post from 3 years ago. A recognizable and respected voice in the technology space, a person named Jason, published what effectively functioned as a collective permission slip for an entire audience. If you are currently in cryptocurrency, pivot toward AI. The appeal of that message is understandable in retrospect. AI was the loud, dynamic, undeniably exciting story of that period. Crypto felt stationary by comparison, so a substantial portion of the audience processed the choice as binary: AI or cryptocurrency, one direction or the other. I believe that framing was fundamentally incorrect, and I believe time is going to demonstrate that rather clearly. Because the more carefully you examine the trajectories of these two technologies, the less they resemble competitors, and the more they resemble two essential components of the same integrated system. The clearest articulation of this argument I have encountered came from Tom Lee of Fundstrat, and I want to give it genuine space because it reorganized my entire perspective on the relationship. His central point, roughly stated, is that cryptocurrency represents a downstream consequence of AI, not an alternative to it. Downstream. As artificial intelligence becomes more capable, more autonomous, more operationally present in the world, the need for blockchains does not diminish, it expands. And the reason for that is almost uncomfortably straightforward. When you have sophisticated AI systems actively operating in the world, initiating transactions, moving value, executing decisions, you require a mechanism to verify that a given action genuinely occurred, that it is confirmed, that it cannot be silently falsified or retroactively altered. A public blockchain represents one of the very few tools currently available that accomplishes precisely that function. It is a layer of verifiable truth positioned beneath the intelligence itself. Lee offered a second observation that remained with me, and it concerns the security dimension. We are already witnessing high-profile attacks targeting AI systems, and the frequency is increasing rather than declining. He noted that a significant proportion of these attacks across the financial sector are never publicly disclosed, because the institutions that sustain them have strong incentives to ensure you remain unaware of what occurred. So the attack surface continues to expand, and the demand for systems capable of verifying and securing transactions grows proportionally alongside it. That is not a cryptocurrency marketing phrase. That is a genuine infrastructure problem actively searching for a durable solution. So when someone counsels you to move away from XRP and toward AI, here is the reframe I would offer in return. If you are holding the right assets, you may already be positioned in AI without having recognized it. You may be holding a stake in the infrastructure layer that the AI economy could ultimately depend upon for its settlement operations, the mechanism by which AI systems pay other AI systems. Two enormous technological transitions, intelligence and value transfer, converging simultaneously while the majority of observers are still engaged in an argument about which one deserves attention. Let me pause here for a moment, because I am genuinely curious about where your thinking lands on this. The idea that cryptocurrency and artificial intelligence exist in a downstream relationship, rather than in competition, was, for many people, a genuinely new way of organizing these concepts the first time they encountered it. So, a brief moment. Did you already understand this connection clearly before today? Or does this represent a new way of seeing the relationship for you? If you already perceived the link, type yes. If this reframed something for you, type no. I genuinely read these responses, and I am curious about how the audience divides on this particular question. There is one additional dimension to the AI and cryptocurrency collision that almost no one connects to the broader picture, and it has nothing to do with software or protocol design. It concerns electricity. Because the artificial intelligence expansion is approaching an inflection point that will ignite a serious conflict over energy resources, and that conflict places XRP in a surprisingly compelling strategic position. A former Ripple insider articulated this argument in a way that reorganized the energy question entirely for me. When you reduce any cryptocurrency or blockchain system to its most fundamental operating requirements, you eventually arrive at an honest question. What kind of infrastructure do you actually want positioned beneath the global economy? And the answer most thoughtful observers give centers on three qualities: speed, accessibility, and a minimal energy footprint. not a system that requires the output of a generating station simply to confirm a routine payment. According to this person, those design priorities were embedded in the XRP Ledger's architecture from its earliest conception. Build something that settles transactions rapidly and at low cost, without the extraordinary energy consumption that characterizes proof-of-work systems like Bitcoin. For years, that characteristic felt like a marginal footnote, a pleasant attribute, but not a decisive one. Now examine the environment we are entering. Artificial intelligence is expanding at a trajectory that very few people anticipated correctly. AI infrastructure operates through data centers. Data centers are extraordinarily power-intensive. The gradual transition toward renewable energy and net zero targets that had been progressing incrementally is now colliding directly with a wall of electricity demand that virtually no one planned for adequately. Even Larry Fink, who oversees BlackRock, the largest asset management firm on the planet, has been stating publicly that substantially more energy generation capacity is needed. When the person responsible for that volume of capital begins speaking openly about energy supply constraints, it is typically an indication that something significant is reorganizing beneath the surface. Watch the direction this dynamic moves. A considerable portion of the energy currently allocated to Bitcoin mining will, in my view, begin migrating toward AI applications, because that is where the economic returns are heading. Capital and resources follow incentive structures. In an environment that is suddenly competing aggressively for every available megawatt of generating capacity, a settlement infrastructure that was designed from the outset to be energy efficient stops functioning as a footnote and begins functioning as a genuine operational advantage. Efficiency transforms from a marketing attribute into something that institutions and enterprises will actively pay a premium for. I am not suggesting that any of this observation guarantees a specific price outcome. I am suggesting that the operating environment is shifting in a direction that structurally favors the kind of system XRP was engineered to represent. And when the surrounding environment finally begins rewarding the characteristics you already possess, you do not need to reinvent yourself. You simply need to be present and positioned when the rest of the market catches up to what was already true. Which returns us to that message I described at the very beginning of this conversation. The one that had nearly persuaded someone they would never be permitted to achieve financial freedom. I told you the underlying logic collapsed when I examined it carefully. Let me show you precisely where the crack appeared. The message was constructed roughly as follows. With over 8 billion people inhabiting this planet, the writer had persuaded themselves that some infinitesimally small fraction of them would ever reach genuine financial independence through XRP. The conclusion they arrived at was essentially this. The structure of the system would never allow that many ordinary individuals to accumulate real wealth simultaneously. Therefore, the entire premise was fundamentally incoherent. I find it almost remarkable that this particular argument is still circulating in 2026, because it represents one of the most enduring and least examined stories in this entire space. For years, some of the loudest voices, frequently the Bitcoin maximalists, recycled various versions of it. XRP holders will never be permitted to succeed. Bitcoin holders can apparently accumulate wealth through the same general market mechanics without issue, but XRP holders are somehow destined to remain disadvantaged indefinitely. When you articulate that belief explicitly and examine it directly, it becomes difficult to sustain. Here is precisely where it falls apart. Nobody has the authority to prevent supply and demand from functioning according to its own internal logic. Price is not a favor allocated by a committee or approved by a governing body. If genuine demand enters the market and available supply contracts, the number adjusts. It does not seek approval from any external party before doing so. The entire framework of "they will not allow it" imagines a gatekeeper operating with a level of control and coordination that simply does not correspond to how price discovery actually functions in liquid markets. And then there is the quiet irony embedded within the fear itself. If the genuine intention were to permanently discourage committed holders from maintaining their positions in this asset, the optimal window for accomplishing that was years ago. During the period of maximum legal uncertainty, when holding conviction required the most effort and the environment provided the least external support. That window has substantially closed. The only remaining mechanism capable of separating a determined long-term holder from their position is not a threatening headline or a discouraging development. It is a high price, a number significant enough that even the most resolute holders eventually determine it is rational to take some portion of their returns off the table. Sit with how inverted that logic becomes when you follow it to its conclusion. The very outcome that people are afraid will be prevented is the only outcome that could ever actually motivate them to exit their position. The fear contradicts itself at its own foundation. So allow me to bring all of this together. The anxiety embedded in that message, the advice to exit XRP in favor of AI, the concern that a motionless chart signals a story that is already concluded. When you examine each of these carefully and without the noise of urgency, none of them hold up quite the way they initially appear to. The silence is not the ending of a narrative. In most cases, it represents the interval immediately preceding something worth watching. I am not offering you a specific price target or a specific date. No person operating with genuine intellectual honesty can make that promise. What I can tell you is that the elements I find most analytically persuasive, the regulatory trajectory, the structural relationship between cryptocurrency and artificial intelligence, the energy efficiency argument, and the straightforward mechanics of supply and demand contracting against expanding demand, are quietly aligning in the same direction. The remainder of the equation is patience. If this provided you with a steadier, more grounded lens through which to evaluate your current position, that is precisely what I was hoping to deliver. Take a breath. Stay composed. I will see you in the next one. This has been XRP NewsWire.